Hey everyone.
Hello.
Just give another couple of seconds for anyone else to join. Okay, I think we can give it a go. Hello everyone. Today is February 20th, and this is the Bounded Context Working Group. So we have a few things in the agenda. I'm actually going to share the screen. So some points we discussed in the call from yesterday. So we can have a quick look at the spreadsheet. So the current activity is we need to fill in this suggested Bounded Context Ruby namespace column. And this taking into consideration information we have from feature category and stage, and then try to set up what namespace this should look like. The general guidelines is if we already have a namespace code that is already well namespaced, and even though it might not exactly match the feature category, it doesn't matter as long as there's like a one-on-one a map there. So we can reuse, for example, we have like merge requests is a very popular namespace. Packages is definitely a popular one. CI, cluster. So you can reuse a lot of this, even though, for example, for cluster, it's actually a feature category is called deployment management. I think cluster is it's fine. Like we, as long as we have like the general understanding at a high level. But then the challenges might become more clear when we are looking into other things that are not very well maybe classified today, like I don't know, GitLab subscriptions and maybe hooks. We need to figure out like where do all this kind of belong. So I've gone a quick pass at this one myself, but I haven't finished yet. So, and we currently are about 22% progress. What we might see is that as we get closer to a higher percentage, like closer to 100%, we see all these kind of edge cases where it's going to be more difficult to categorize. And I think this is where we need to, I'm trying to anticipate some of these conversations on how things should be, where things will belong. So any questions on this or concerns? Okay, sounds good. So if we jump first, like the question we didn't cover yesterday, and then if we have time, we can do a bit of the if you have any other question, we can revisit some of the points from yesterday. So the code under groups and projects feature category, it's currently we have a lot of code there, and I think a feature category called groups and projects, if we have like a bounded context just to contain all of these, it could be too much. I'm not sure, but we do have like projects and groups as namespaces today. The problem is that with things like projects, it's a bit overloaded of responsibility. We might find things actually related to other domains, but just because it's like a project level feature, it's nested under project. So I think this is the wrong pattern. In my opinion, things under projects and groups namespaces should be things that are intrinsically related to projects and groups as containers of features. More like create projects, destroy projects. With the life cycle of a project, it intrinsically, but not to the features like a project level or group level. So I think from this perspective, we could probably keep projects and groups as separate domains, but we will need to reframe the responsibilities. So what I mean for this is, let's try to look at some examples. Yeah, for example, project compliance standards. This is compliance management, so this shouldn't live under projects namespace. It should be more like I don't know, maybe it's going to be compliance namespace, and then we have something like a project compliance, for example, rather than being nested under project. So things under project should be more create project, destroy project, or transfer and things like that. Yeah, the same as a group level. We have similar examples at group level. I'm not sure, like with organization, this is kind of more like a really rough idea, but if we have organizations namespace, would that be maybe another idea where we would group, organization groups and projects? It's kind of workspaces under a single maybe organizations or workspaces bounded context, and that deals with just this kind of high-level containers, and that's it. That could be another way, but we're curious about your thoughts.
I don't have any thoughts on that specific, but I've been on PTO, so I missed the last few of these meetings, but I've been thinking about this a lot, the goal of this group, and especially after the blog from Shopify about pack work, and then the resulting conversation on the Ruby modularity Slack channel. And my main thought has been is like, what do we have that is quantifiable in how we make these decisions? Because you can, split them in lots of different ways, and there could be arguments one way or the other. And one of the things that sort of became apparent to me on that thread is, and we even have that open issue still, it's like, what are the goals of this? And what are the metrics we're going to use to measure this? Like, what is the benefit of this effort? And so and I've been meaning to try to write this up and like ask some questions on the modularity Slack and get people's opinions there and sort of bring that in the blog post. Like that happened when I was on PTO and we already mentioned it, but I think there's a lot more discussion to be had.
Mm-hmm.
But like, what are the concrete benefits we can get from this? Like one, I think, is sort of how GitHub, they have that initiative to expand code owners to sort of teams are responsible for code. So like that's one thing we could do, like who actually owns the code? But from a concrete perspective, it's like, can you run the test for this code in isolation, right? Well, that'll let us, speed up review cycles or speed up CI times or whatever. Like that's something concrete. And by reading that Shopify blog, that was really, really hard for them to do. Or another one would be like, can you run this in isolation? Like, could you do an isolated boot of an engine? It seems like engines were sort of discouraged, but now maybe it's like, actually, that's a better way because you can encapsulate your models. Whereas the more I think about this, it's like everything is coupled to active record and active record is coupled to everything. So like, how are we ever really going to disentangle this stuff? Like what is the overall goal and benefits we're going to get from this? And I don't have a good answer. And I just looked at the handbook page and it seems like it's not really clear yet.
Okay.
So, sort of bigger questions I've been thinking, assigning ownership is good, but like, why are we doing this? What's the end benefit of all of this?
Yeah, so yeah, you raise a good point, and I think we still need to uh, decide, Packwork where it fits in this all initiative. But I think this is like a, pre-Packwork, this is like regardless whether we will be using some tools like Packwork to enforce boundaries or not. I think this is kind of an exercise that I think it merits to define some pattern at architecture level of how we want to, you know, design features, how we want these to be, how we want dependencies to be defined, for example. Um, there is like this is like important regardless whether we go all the way like with Packwork. I think there's also several levels of modularity. Um, one thing is namespace. Correct namespacing things correct. Actually, the level 0 is just not namespacing things correctly, just everything together and bundled together. Uh, we are not really at that stage. We are kind of halfway towards modularization because we have good namespacing in some cases not. So we're trying to fix this pattern. But we can go all the way to what Shopify was trying to do. Like, how can I run this entire module in isolation? But in order to do that, you need to be very, uh, there is a lot of effort involved in trying to isolate things, in defining the interfaces, and make sure that everything through that module or pack, whatever it's called, goes through the public interface. The and there is private concepts, you can't reach into it and all these kind of things. So to confidently run things in isolation, it is very hard. And I think we need to be pragmatic in what we want to do. Also, look, reading that the latest news about Packwork and on Shopify. Um, I think we need to be pragmatic. In some cases, in the code base, it might make sense to use a more strict approach. I don't know. I'm thinking about something more like risky or where there is some money involved. I don't know, purchasing CI minutes, something like where no, we might
Oh,
want to have like extra um, uh, isolation there, or you want to have very specific API or some critical parts of the code base where we want to kind of protect it a little bit more. In some cases, it makes sense to maybe enforce privacy and have these boundaries more clearly defined. In some other cases, it might be enough to define where this feature fits. Everything is inside this module. As long as everything is inside this module, you are dealing with this feature. If you want to connect with other modules, they might have to define some pattern that's kind of loosely uh, coupled, right? Um,
but
but I
if you
think
say
there's different levels that we can use in different parts of the code base, rather
but
than
when you
trying to
say
say,
things like good or bad or like pragmatic, to me that means like there needs to be some objective measure of that. Like you need to say this is easier to run in isolation, or this is easier to assign to a group, or this is easier to boot independently. Like
yes,
if you don't
some of
have
them,
concrete measures like that, we will just bite shed over like what is good, like what is bad, what is the goal of what we're doing.
yes, yeah. So I think it's trying to have everything that can run in isolation, and it's very
I mean,
hard.
that's just an example. I'm saying like
Yeah,
there
yeah,
should be when you say, well, is this good or bad? Is this pragmatic? It's like, well, does it do this? Yes or no? It's like a not a subjective question.
okay. So the first things we are trying to solve is like define ownership, and so clearly define ownership. And this could be like two ways. It could be that we do like a top-down approach, which is primarily what we have been doing so far. Okay, we know what the feature categories are. Okay, let's assign this to the code. This also can be a bottom-up approach where we say, okay, we have a bunch of things that are maybe I use an example. Yeah, here this could be more like a type of bottom-up approach. Uh, we have things like system nodes, to-dos that seem not to be um, owned specifically. They're kind of shared, but maybe they should be part of. a very specific, auditing trail kind of a feature of the application.
So assigning ownership is like a goal in and of itself. Like that's our first step. Like
Yes, exactly. So this could be the first thing, like, first kind of measurable goal of say, okay, we have a lot of shared code and maybe some of this shared code can be a feature category on its own. So there's a lot of feature categories that are not really thought as, customer centric, but then maybe they can be like one of these can be like audit trailing. Could be to-dos, leaving system notes like and automatically everywhere in the app. Um, I don't know, maybe email notification, things like that. Maybe this can be something that currently shared that can become a product category, and it can have a very specific ownership. Um, it's two ways, in my opinion. Try to cover this ownership for this exercise.
so
And
then
then,
for this stage, maybe like if we're assigning ownership as the goal of this, maybe like when we get into the discussions of how should this be split up? Should this be split up? Should it be moved? Like, are those premature? Because those are, discussions that the answer to that may depend on other things. It's like, well, is that worth the effort? Does it make it easier to run in isolation? Does it make it easier to have independent tests or not? Like, we don't know yet. So perhaps for this phase, just like as the code base is, like you don't try to change things as you refactor them, right?
Mhm.
That's sort of a recipe for disaster if you try to change the code while you're refactoring it. So it's like maybe this effort, inevitably people want to say, well, how should we make this better? But maybe we intentionally say, no, don't do that. Like the code as it stands today, it's either assigned to somebody or it's in one of these common buckets. But let's just get through with the code as it is, the current namespaces, and then in the next phase, we'll define more goals and more metrics of how we want
yeah,
to
so
do
so
things.
so we actually don't want to change things right now. We don't have to
Those
go and
discussions are
make
still
change.
coming up on the channel and stuff. Like maybe
Yes, yes.
we
But
aren't
what do we want to do
actively
is
saying
that
it's not ready for that yet.
as we define this list, we could even say, can we enforce this with the static analyzer that, any class should be namespace under any of these, assuming we need to remove some junk here, but like, can we make sure that these will be the new classes being created? Existing code can still remain, existing Rubocop to-dos for us to kind of violation to fix over time, but we don't have to go and make changes, to existing code necessarily right now. It's just more to have a high level picture. And this list doesn't have to be strict. So maybe, in a week time, again, these files have changed since we exported this. So it's more like just to have like a high level view. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate. But then we can say, oh, I want to separate, I don't know, design management into different things. So I actually want to introduce a new bounded context. We add it to the list, and that is fine. But things are more conscious decisions. Because today we have a lot of things that, as we saw, maybe compliance code or some security features, maybe it might be spread across multiple different namespaces. They actually relate to the same feature, but actually the namespace is different. So this is like one way of fixing that. One of the discussion we had yesterday, interesting, was distinction between domain code and platform code. So today we might, one idea could be that we keep the GitLab namespace for things that are related to the infrastructure, or intended as the GitLab framework, GitLab development framework, which will be stuff related for databases, helpers, utils, things for testing can go into the GitLab namespace as intended for platform specific concepts. And then anything that is domain specific should be outside of the GitLab namespace, so into the specific domain. So for example, we do have the case of CI. We have some CI code is in GitLab CI, and then we have CI namespace under app. So we should be moving, in the long term, all the code from GitLab CI into CI namespace and just not have GitLab, because GitLab should maybe be for platform specific code. So this is like another goal we could, we have, like distinguishing clearly like platform specific code from domain. And another thing we touched yesterday somewhere was like after we do this exercise, we could the exercise of defining this in top level namespaces. We could draw dependency map of, if we consider the top level namespaces only. We don't need to go constant references across like constant to constant, but like top level namespace by top level namespace. We could have a much clearer view that we could even have up in our documentation page to say this is the current architecture of GitLab
You mean by like
from
finding
a
only
model.
those within Packwork and running the dependency?
Yeah, I think there is all the tools we could use and filter out, and filter like not by constant, but we can just look at the top level namespace, and we can say I don't know, CI depends on user, and I don't know, merge request depends on CI, but CI doesn't depend on merge request. Things like that. It's actually very clear for everyone to understand where this module fit into the overall architecture. And are there things, eventually we might want to change, like, it shouldn't be a two-way dependency, but maybe it should be one-way dependency in specific case. This might be even without even using Packwork. We could have this kind of understanding at a high level. Today it's impossible to get this understanding unless you've been working for a few years on very specific code base, but you don't get that kind of a high level picture.
Are there alternate tools that do that?
I think there is some tools that deal with constant and try to define constant references. Peter I think he had some ideas, but we could do definitely. We definitely could do that.
Yeah, and even with Packwork, there's like Gusto's version, which is better than Shopify's version, which is dependent on Zeitwork, but Zeitwork doesn't handle all of the meta programmed references.
Yeah, even we could have Packwork as a wrapper of modules around module. Okay, it will require moving files into different directory structure, but that could be like a next phase where you can have Packwork just for the sake of getting metadata, and just for the sake of defining ownership, defining what's private, what's public, and defining dependencies. But actually, you're not going to enforce dependencies, or not going to enforce certain, like privacy. What thing you could do that once you have Packwork around modules is actually kind of a much clearer picture of this kind of dependency graph. But again, we can use Packwork and at our advantage without having to enforce necessarily things strictly, because it requires a lot more effort. But yeah, that could be like another next level of modularization. I think what we need to do is we need to be mindful of not creating a burden for developers. And this is probably some of the issues that Shopify encountered. Making things very strict means developers need to follow a very strict way of communicating between bounded context.
Right.
You need to have very specific way of fetching, records from a different domain. And you need to
Which
go
is
through
why having a
interfaces.
concrete goal, it's like if you do this, you can run your tests in isolation, and you don't have to.
Yes, you do have
wait
the
for
advantage
hour
of
for
running
CI to
tests
run.
in isolation.
Run in
Yes,
10
but
minutes.
the disadvantage is that there is a lot more kind of machinery involved into getting that done for a developer. Like you want to have, you want to be productive in a specific way, and it should not, spend the whole day to try to go around the interfaces and things like that. The serialization across modules and things like that. So it makes sense for certain parts of the application. It could make sense. For other parts of the application, might be a bit too much. But I think there is still advantages we can use with we can get from Packwork by not enforcing things too much, and then we kind of gradually we can increase this bar as we feel more comfortable. Yeah, but I think this modularization and this exercise, I think it's important regardless of with whether we use Packwork or not. I think this will be still interesting for us to categorize things properly, to understand what should go inside users. Because today we just throw a lot of stuff. What should go inside projects? Should certain things go into repositories versus merge requests, and have this kind of conversations, this kind of a very clear understanding of where things should go, and because it really help designing by following use cases and not following data or like data flow.
Okay.
So the action items to continue doing is try to increase this progress of the namespaces, and really is to try to understand how much of this can be reused versus like what needs to be changed. I'm going to start asking on the Slack channel more specific questions where we can have conversations around, things like where like should issues go to a specific place, or should they should that be like a bounded context by itself? Some of things that are very unclear, like how should they be organized? I might ask these questions. If we do have DRIs per stage, so I might just ask directly DRIs per stage. But it would be good to have this kind of conversation altogether.
And the benefit we'll get after we're through with this is that it will be easier to assign ownership for all areas of the code and to know which areas have no owners. Is that?
Yeah, so we could do that. The ideal scenario would be then where instead of having models, I don't know, design management, models, groups, model identity, we have identity, and then we have models, services, lib, anything there. It would be a lot easier to design ownership around this, even like if you think about code owners or any other features around that. Because anything under this directory belongs to this team or to this set of teams. Sometimes we have CI that's actually owned by 3 different teams. But we know internally we actually have like stage level maintainers, approvers. So I think it's a lot easier once it's going to be that way. But initially, we will just want to make sure things are namespace correctly.
Is there any way we can measure the benefit that will give us? Like what will be easier? Can we measure it?
So
I'm trying to play the devil's advocate here. Like what
yes,
the benefit of doing this work? How will we see it concretely? Now that we're like seeing the difficulty of it and all of the red that's still left on here, it's like what are our goals?
what's the value? What's the value? Yes. So there, I think a lot of the points are defined in the proposal for the modular monolith. Like a lot of the the problems and then the benefit of doing that. Yes, it's just like a long list of things there. But again, some of these, like a lot of these things could be seen at different levels of modularization. Like running tests in isolation will be like at the highest level of
Right.
modularization. But these other things like ownership or getting around the code base as a new developer and have an understanding, okay, all I need to care, in my team is under this namespace. Initially I don't need to care about other stuff. A reduced context, a more specific way of defining, breaking down classes. We have like a lot of the initiatives we have in software design guides. They do relate very, very specifically to this, the modularization, designing around use cases and not entities. How to break down use dependent inversions to extract domain concepts. Like don't put stuff into project, but instead use integrations, project integrations, settings. Don't put everything into project settings, but maybe have, I don't know, merge requests module, and then you have project settings. So where each team can have their own workspace to work on, and we're not going to just put stuff where the other data is, but we need to look more at, from a domain perspective, where does it make sense for this code to live. So we do have a lot of anti-patterns today in the code base, and these help move towards that modularization and that kind of the exercise that we are doing now. So there's a lot of advantages there in terms of quantifiable. It is hard, and I think we need to definitely come up with some metrics in the long term. But ultimately, I think we need to have some kind of a developer survey to understand how does it feel, to work in the code base, how do you think this can help you, and stuff like that. I think having the kind of the human side of the data is super important here, because it's ultimately want to make life easier for developers as we maintain this code base, make it more maintainable in the long term, but also make life easier for developers.
Yeah, and unless we can quantify it and have some sort of static analysis, like people are always going to continue to do the anti-patterns because they don't know better if some linter or CI doesn't prevent them from doing it. So that's what I'm thinking, like the effort we're doing here, how do we keep it from rotting as soon as we clean it up, or like continuing to backslide?
Yeah, so I think if I know we are over time, so I just want to try to wrap this up.
I'm just like
no. I'm saying, like, if we have this list, this is my assumption. Okay, so if we have this list and we enforce this list for new classes, next time you want to create, we need to also have documentation. So this plus the documentation we have here on how not to fall into the trap of putting stuff in the wrong place. I think it would definitely help developers to put, to ensure that we maintain this in the long term. So the example is, like, should you add, and you want to add a new project setting, you say, okay, this is related to my, merge requests. I'm working on merge requests. I want to add a new merge request specific setting. And I know I can put it into project settings, but, we have this new guideline. So maybe I should keep using my existing merge requests namespace as much as possible, and create a model there for project level settings. So this is more like to avoid having kind of to put stuff in different places when they are actually related to the same feature. And we can see like what kind of violation we see over time, and we can have guidelines around that. And sometimes we might make it even stricter by having rubocops. But yeah, I think that's just the initial step. Okay, we are all at time. So if any questions, feel free to leave them in the Slack channel. And yeah, let's continue to make this progress on here. I'll ping the various teams, DRIs, to solicit some progress here, so we can try to wrap up at least a list of this, and we can modify over time, so then it doesn't have to be right the first time.
So I have the namespace was added after I made the first pass. I assume that like remote development, I could just add that and that will be a new namespace.
Yes,
The
yes.
ones. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.
Bye.